My sister's baby shower was held at a luxury restaurant, but there was no seat for me. My sister said, "Why don't you try that dirty pub across the street?" My mom added, "It suits you perfectly." I smiled and said, "I'll do that," before quietly leaving. But when they saw me enter the pub, their faces turned pale. Sometimes family can be the cruelest. The words were printed on premium paper, the handwriting unmistakably Melanie's, precise, elegant, and without a single flaw, much like her life. Elizabeth adjusted the light gray silk dress she wore, catching her reflection in the restaurant's glass doors. Her makeup was subtle yet refined, and a delicate pearl necklace shimmered at her collarbone, a reward she had gifted herself when she launched her first restaurant a decade ago. Leon, perched atop the Four Seasons Hotel in Boston, exuded luxury. The venue offered breathtaking views of Beacon Hill, seamlessly blending Boston's historic charm with sleek modernity. Elizabeth wasn't surprised this place had been chosen. She'd heard that Melanie's husband, James Clark, often entertained his high-profile investment banking clients here. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" The receptionist's gaze flickered over Elizabeth as she handed over the invitation. The Wilson Clark baby shower. The hostess studied the guest list before offering a polite nod. Elizabeth didn't miss the subtle scrutiny in her eyes. She knew exactly how she was perceived, likely still labeled as the sister who ran a pub. That outdated, 10-year-old lie had never been corrected, a convenient narrative her family had shaped for their own reasons. Inside, the venue was already filled with elegantly dressed guests under the warm glow of chandeliers. Women in the latest designer fashion clinked champagne glasses, their polished laughter echoing through the room. Crisp white linens draped over the tables, each centerpiece adorned with soft blue floral arrangements. At the heart of it all stood Melanie, 7 months pregnant, radiating perfection. She could have walked straight out of a luxury magazine, her high-end maternity gown draping flawlessly over her frame. A dazzling diamond necklace, no doubt a gift from James, glittered at her throat. Beside her stood their mother, Carol, every strand of her hair meticulously styled, clad in designer labels. She thrived in circles like these, her rise from real estate agent to high society matron fueled by an obsession with status. She had mapped out the perfect lives for her daughters. At least Melanie had followed the script. Elizabeth, however, had always been the family stray thread, the one who never quite fit. "Well, Elizabeth, you actually came." Her mother's tone held a trace of surprise, laced with the usual undertone of disapproval, a voice Elizabeth had heard too many times before. For the last decade, their interactions had been limited to the occasional family event. And, just like always, she was a guest in their world, an outsider looking in. It had been an unspoken agreement. Her mother and sister thrived in their exclusive suburban enclave, immersed in their curated social circles. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was presumed to lead a quiet, unremarkable life downtown. At least, that's what they believed. In truth, Elizabeth was the owner and executive chef of the Hidden Gem, a high-end restaurant nestled within a meticulously restored red brick building in the Beacon Hill district. Her establishment was a discreet favorite among Harvard scholars and old money elites. Yet, to the world, she was simply known as Chef Liz, deliberately avoiding the spotlight. No social media presence, no flashy interviews, just a stellar reputation built on word of mouth and glowing features in gourmet publications. With a permanent 3-month waitlist, the Hidden Gem was a legend in itself. Her family, however, remained completely unaware. As Elizabeth scanned the venue, her gaze fell upon the place cards neatly arranged at each table. Yet, her name was conspicuously absent. From across the room, Melanie's closest friends, alumni of the same elite private school and long-standing country club members, stole glances in her direction, murmuring behind manicured hands. "Is that the sister everyone whispers about? I heard she runs a bar. A pub, right?" The words were spoken just loudly enough to be overheard. Elizabeth inhaled deeply, offering a composed smile. Within her heart lay a quiet, unshakable confidence, carefully forged over the last decade. With deliberate steps, she made her way through the elegantly arranged space. The chandeliers above cast flickering shadows against the polished floors, their glow illuminating the pristine white tablecloths and pastel blue floral centerpieces. Familiar faces from Newton's high society filled the room. As she moved, conversations momentarily hushed, only to pick up again in hushed murmurs. The whispers swirled through the venue like an invisible current. Still, her name was nowhere to be found. 10 meticulously arranged round tables, each seating 12, each setting marked by a high-quality name card. Yet, Elizabeth Wilson did not appear on a single one. Across the room, hotel staff carefully arranged an assortment of delicacies, smoked salmon canapes, caviar-topped blinis, truffle-infused quiche. Elizabeth's trained eye immediately caught the minute imperfections in presentation. Some habits never faded. Elizabeth, even after coming all this way, Melanie's voice broke through her thoughts, the artificial warmth in her tone unmistakable. You seem to be having trouble finding your seat. Elizabeth simply met her sister's gaze, her expression unreadable. Standing just behind Melanie, James regarded her with a calculating look, an expression honed by years in investment banking. We had a last-minute increase in guests, Melanie continued, her features carefully arranged into something resembling regret. We had to prioritize our most important attendees. Elizabeth understood the message loud and clear. She wasn't important. She never had been. Then, as if struck by sudden inspiration, Melanie's eyes sparkled. But don't worry, she chirped, her voice lifting with faux enthusiasm. I just had the perfect idea. Why don't you try that dingy little pub across the street? It seems more your style. Melanie's words floated through the air like champagne bubbles, effortlessly bursting into ripples of laughter among the surrounding guests. Yes, Carol chimed in, her smirk laced with satisfaction. That would be absolutely perfect for you. Elizabeth inhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch. A decade had passed, yet standing here now, she realized nothing had changed. Not really. I'll do just that. Her voice was poised, her smile unreadable, carrying an elegance that sent an unfamiliar hush through the room. Enjoy your baby shower. With unwavering grace, she turned and exited the venue. The rhythmic click of her designer heels against the marble floor echoed like a quiet declaration. Behind her, laughter flared anew, her mother and sister reveling in their triumph, their victory secured. The guests leaned in, already spinning fresh gossip from the scene. In the hallway, Elizabeth paused by a window. The Boston skyline shimmered in the twilight, and amid the sea of city lights, her eyes landed on the hidden gem. Behind her, Melanie and Carol observed her silhouette, outlined against the setting sun. To them, she was nothing more than a figure of pity, a woman they had successfully diminished. But Elizabeth knew better. She resumed her steps, her movement light, almost effortless. The time for truth was drawing near. Retrieving her jacket from the front desk, she exited the hotel. Across the street, her mother and sister watched, pleased with themselves. Their satisfaction, however, would be fleeting. As she strolled toward the pub they had so mockingly suggested, she pulled out her phone. A single message illuminated the screen. Michelin inspectors confirmed for next week. A quiet smile played at her lips. 1 week later, over breakfast, Carol sipped her coffee while skimming through the Boston Globe. Her eyes suddenly halted on a bold headline, "The Hidden Gem, Boston's Culinary Treasure." The article was accompanied by stunning photographs of meticulously plated dishes, but what stole her breath was the name beneath them. Chef Liz. From across the table, James furrowed his brow and tilted the newspaper toward him. Melanie, curiosity piqued, leaned over his shoulder. Wait, the Hidden Gem? The impossible-to-book restaurant? James nodded, impressed. Even the president of Harvard dines there. Some of my firm's executives have been desperate to get a table, but there's always a 3-month wait. Carol continued reading, her grip on the paper tightening. The article detailed how the restaurant, housed in a carefully restored Beacon Hill brownstone, had become one of the city's most exclusive dining destinations. With only 20 seats, adorned with crystal chandeliers and antique furnishings, it was an intimate world of culinary artistry. Chef Liz, Elizabeth, had spent the past decade crafting a reputation as one of the most innovative chefs in the country. Her training in France had honed her techniques, and her relentless dedication had earned her 2 Michelin stars, with aspirations set even higher. Maybe we should try dining there? Melanie suggested hesitantly. It's practically in our backyard. Yet, securing a reservation proved to be more than just difficult. Reservations were by recommendation only. And not just any recommendation, a letter from an approved patron was required. How pretentious, Carol muttered, displeasure twisting her lips. The realization that even they, despite their social standing, couldn't effortlessly secure a table at the Hidden Gem stung their pride. That afternoon, while shopping in the Beacon Hill district, Carol happened to pass by the restaurant. The historic building stood gracefully under the golden afternoon light, its windows offering no glimpse into the world inside. And then, she saw something that made her pause. A sleek luxury car pulled up to the entrance. The door opened and Elizabeth stepped out. Her outfit was simple, yet her posture carried an unfamiliar poise, an effortless authority that Carol didn't recognize. But what truly caught her off guard was the figure following closely behind. A renowned artist, someone Carol had seen countless times on television. And to her astonishment, the artist was speaking to Elizabeth with unmistakable warmth. Elizabeth, thank you once again for another extraordinary meal. I was moved, as always. Elizabeth inclined her head graciously. The honor is mine. I truly appreciate your visit. Carol halted mid-step, stunned. The voice, Elizabeth's voice, held a quiet confidence she had never heard before. Then, from inside the restaurant, staff members emerged in a steady stream. One by one, they bowed deeply in Elizabeth's direction, not out of mere formality, but with genuine reverence. Carol's breath caught. They weren't treating her like a colleague. They were treating her like a leader. Chef, regarding today's Michelin inspector visit, a man, who appeared to be the sous chef, approached Elizabeth, speaking in hushed tones. Proceed as usual, she replied, unshaken, exuding calm authority. Carol lingered in the shadow of the building, unable to move. Where was the Elizabeth she had always dismissed, the disappointment, the failure, the woman they had ridiculed for working at a pub? The person before her was someone else entirely. The moment she returned home, Carol immediately called Melanie. I saw something unbelievable today. Melanie frowned, confused by her mother's frantic tone. I saw Elizabeth at the Hidden Gem, and it wasn't just that. She looked like she belonged there. More than that, she looked like she ran the place. A silence stretched between them. That's impossible, Melanie's voice wavered. But doubts had begun to creep in. They combed through scattered memories, Elizabeth's reserved demeanor at family events, her deliberate withdrawal from social circles, her knowledge of fine cuisine, the way she had never corrected them about her so-called pub job. Piece by piece, everything was beginning to make sense. That night, Melanie and James sat together, searching for more information about the Hidden Gem. The restaurant's official website was frustratingly vague. Chef Liz was listed by name, but no photos. No personal details. But gourmet magazines and review sites? They overflowed with admiration. Melanie clicked on an old interview in a culinary journal. Chef Liz trained at a 3-Michelin-starred restaurant in France before opening the Hidden Gem 10 years ago. James exhaled sharply. 10 years ago? His mind raced. That's when Elizabeth suddenly distanced herself from the family. Melanie hesitated, then pulled up the photos from her baby shower. Her fingers hovered over an image of Elizabeth walking away. She studied it closely. The way Elizabeth carried herself that night. It wasn't the posture of someone defeated. It was the stance of someone unshaken. Someone in control. A chill ran down Melanie's spine. Could we have? Her words trailed off, swallowed by the darkness of the room. The next morning, Carol returned to the Hidden Gem. This time, it was during the restaurant's early preparations. Delivery trucks lined the street, one after another, unloading crates of the finest ingredients, exquisite seafood, rare truffles, aged wines. Amidst the organized chaos, Elizabeth stood at the center of it all, methodically inspecting each item. Carol watched silently. And for the first time, she realized Elizabeth had never been the failure. Dressed in a crisp white chef's coat, Elizabeth looked nothing like the daughter Carol thought she knew. She moved with quiet authority, her every command met with swift efficiency. The kitchen staff followed her lead without hesitation, their unwavering trust built over a decade. Carol felt something tighten in her chest. The daughter she had scorned, the one she had dismissed as a lowly pub worker, was in fact a celebrated chef, respected, admired. And for 10 years, they had been blind to it. 2 weeks after the baby shower, the truth came crashing down. Taste of Boston, the city's leading gourmet magazine, ran a special feature on the Hidden Gem's 10th anniversary. Elizabeth's photograph dominated the cover. Standing in her kitchen, clad in her pristine white chef's coat, she exuded a dignified confidence. The headline read, "The True Face of Chef Liz, the story behind the 2 Michelin-starred Hidden Gem." Melanie was waiting for her prenatal checkup when she casually picked up the magazine. The moment she saw her sister's face staring back at her, her breath hitched. She nearly dropped the issue. The article laid everything bare. After graduating from Boston University, Elizabeth Wilson had trained in France under some of the world's finest chefs. Upon her return to the U.S., she immediately opened the Hidden Gem, her vision brought to life. She had been the protégé of the legendary chef Jean-Pierre Dubois. The feature detailed her meteoric rise, her years of training in Michelin-starred kitchens, and the deliberate precision with which she built her career. Every step had been carefully planned. The cuisine of Chef Liz, also known as Elizabeth Wilson, is a blend of classic French technique and contemporary artistry. Her signature dish, Landscape of Memories, is a masterpiece that honors French tradition while celebrating New England's finest ingredients. Melanie was so engrossed that she completely forgot about her appointment. There was a side to Elizabeth she had never known. The article described her global recognition, the restaurant's 3-month-long waitlist, and, most importantly, Elizabeth's strict policy. Reservations required a letter of recommendation from existing patrons. This wasn't just about exclusivity. It was about value. Elizabeth Wilson welcomed only those who truly appreciated the essence of fine cuisine. Melanie, shaken, reached for her phone. But before she could dial, she saw a notification. Her mother had already called her twice. Carol sat in the living room, the magazine trembling in her hands. She had read the article over and over, yet the words still felt surreal. The Hidden Gem wasn't just a restaurant. It was a cultural institution. Harvard professors, renowned artists, celebrated writers, they all sought refuge in Elizabeth's world. The article ended with a quote from Elizabeth herself. In cuisine, it's not about superficial presentation. It's about essential value. I only wish to share that joy with those who truly understand it. The words hit like a quiet, devastating protest. A message meant for them. That evening, at his investment firm's executive meeting, James sat with an uneasy expression. The chairman leaned forward, a knowing smirk on his face. So, is it true that the Hidden Gem chef is your sister-in-law? The room fell silent. James swallowed hard. We've been trying to secure a table for 6 months with no luck, the chairman continued. Surely, you can arrange something through family connections? James hesitated. He had always described Elizabeth as the sister-in-law who worked at a pub. He had never once acknowledged the truth. And now? Now, he couldn't. I'm afraid I don't have those details, he finally muttered. The weight of the executive's stares bore down on him. To dine at the Hidden Gem had become a status symbol. And James? James wasn't even close. That night, Carol and Melanie stood outside the Hidden Gem, staring through its warmly lit windows. Inside, patrons enjoyed an exquisite evening, completely immersed in the culinary world Elizabeth had created. Elegance, refinement, artistry, none of which they had ever attributed to her. Melanie's voice shook. What have we done? Carol said nothing. She could still hear her own voice from that day. Why don't you try that pub across the street? Regret settled deep in her bones. She had been so blind. And now it was too late. Carol had spent years judging her daughter through the lens of shallow expectations, never once making an effort to truly understand her. And now, in the cruelest irony, Elizabeth had already secured the very place in high society that Carol and Melanie had spent their lives chasing. The next morning, Carol attempted to make a reservation at the Hidden Gem. She was met with the usual polite response. I'm sorry, but a letter of recommendation is required. Carol's grip on the phone tightened. I'm Elizabeth Wilson's mother. Her voice wavered. Silence stretched on the other end. Please hold while I check with the chef. Minutes passed before the receptionist returned. We apologize, but the chef has requested that you follow the standard reservation procedure. A quiet finality settled over Carol. In that moment, she understood everything. A decade of dismissal, condescension, and scorn. This was the cost. The weight of it crushed her. Melanie felt it too. Despite being less than a month away from giving birth, she found herself drawn to the Hidden Gem, visiting almost daily. But all she could do was linger outside, watching as the tantalizing aroma of Elizabeth's cuisine drifted through the doors as guests stepped out, satiated, content. The world Elizabeth had built stood just beyond her reach. One afternoon, summoning every ounce of courage, Melanie finally stepped inside. She searched the space, scanning the elegant, intimate dining room. But Elizabeth was nowhere to be seen. A waiter approached. Reservations require a letter of recommendation from an existing patron. Melanie was about to turn away when a familiar voice spoke. Do you have a letter of recommendation, ma'am? Her breath caught. Elizabeth had stepped out of the kitchen, her chef's coat pristine, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met. And yet, the way Elizabeth looked at her was no different than how she might regard a stranger. The words, simple as they were, felt heavier than a decade of resentment. Overcome, Melanie fled the restaurant, tears stinging her eyes. Through her blurred vision, she caught a glimpse of the luxury cars lining the curb outside. The very world they had once aspired to was now controlled by her sister. Inside, Elizabeth continued plating each dish with meticulous care. There was no anger left in her. No hatred. Only quiet acceptance. A few days later, Carol and Melanie found an envelope in their mailbox. It was made of fine stationery, Elizabeth's graceful handwriting unmistakable. Inside was a single note. True value lies not in superficial decoration, but in essence. If you are ready to understand that, the message trailed off. No anger. No reproach. Just a truth they had long refused to see. A month later, Melanie gave birth to a baby girl. Bouquets filled her hospital room, extravagant, indulgent arrangements sent by well-wishers. But one stood apart. A simple, elegant bouquet of seasonal wildflowers, quietly beautiful. A single card was attached. Congratulations. The handwriting was unmistakable. It had come from the Hidden Gem. Melanie held the note in her trembling hands, staring at the arrangement. It was different from the others. Unpretentious. Meaningful. It carried the very essence of Elizabeth's philosophy, the belief that true beauty, true value, was found not in excess, but in sincerity. Melanie turned to her mother, newborn in her arms. Mom, what do we do? Carol said nothing, only gazed silently out the window. She had called the hidden gem several times, each time hoping for an exception. Each time, she had received only polite refusals. Then, one morning, another letter arrived. Elizabeth's handwriting once again graced the envelope. If you truly wish to understand, the message waited inside. And this time, for the first time in 10 years, they were ready to listen. Why don't you start at the restaurant at the very bottom? Elizabeth's proposal landed like a thunderclap. To understand essence, one must begin with the basics. Carol and Melanie were speechless. Their ingrained pride urged them to refuse immediately. But they had no other choice. 3 months after giving birth, Melanie stepped into the Hidden Gems kitchen for the first time, not in a crisp chef's coat, but in a dishwasher's apron. Carol, too, had taken a role, working weekends as a dining room assistant. The first few weeks were grueling. Melanie's hands blistered from hours of scrubbing heavy cookware, her back aching from the relentless pace. Carol's feet throbbed after every shift, her once impeccable posture hunched with exhaustion. Elizabeth treated them no differently than any other trainee. Things of value take time. That was all she said. But something began to shift. As Melanie scrubbed dishes, she started to recognize the care poured into each plate. Carol, while observing guests light up with joy at their meals, began to grasp the true meaning of hospitality. Their perceptions were changing. 6 months later, Melanie finally had the chance to taste Elizabeth's food. It was during a staff tasting session after a long meeting. The moment the flavors touched her tongue, she froze. A lump formed in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes. Because in that dish, she could feel 10 years' worth of emotions. Everything her sister had endured, built, and longed to express was right there. A year passed. Carol was officially hired as part of the front-of-house team. Melanie, now an apprentice cook, trained from scratch under Elizabeth's guidance. Their transformation was undeniable. The allure of their old social circles had faded. Instead, they had developed an eye for what truly mattered. Carol even began attending therapy, confronting the values she had once held so rigidly. Melanie immersed herself in learning the foundations of cooking, not for status, but out of genuine passion. One evening, after closing, Elizabeth called them both over. Her voice was softer than usual. Starting tomorrow, shall we meet as family? The words were simple. But to Carol and Melanie, they meant everything. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was a new beginning. A bond rebuilt on something real. The following Sunday, the Hidden Gem welcomed a special gathering. Though the restaurant usually only opened for dinner, Elizabeth had made an exception. For the first time, she prepared a meal just for them. The dishes were unpretentious, no elaborate plating, no extravagant garnishes. Just pure, heartfelt cooking. The bouquet on the table mirrored the one she had sent to the hospital, simple, filled with seasonal wildflowers. A quiet, gentle kindness. Elizabeth set down the final dish. "This is how I truly feel," she said. Her gaze met theirs. "I'm proud that you've learned to see essence rather than appearance." Beyond the window, Boston's morning light cast a golden glow on the streets, and within the red brick walls of the Hidden Gem, a new chapter quietly unfolded. A family once broken had found its way back together. Not through obligation, but through understanding, through true value.